All right, how's it going, DEI community and everyone tuning in to Beyond Labels, DEIB Explored? We're here today and very fortunate to be speaking with our friend, but more importantly, just a management consultant who has close to 20 years in industry, an absolute trailblazer in the market. Because she's a friend, I know that all of this may at some point embarrass her, but truly someone who has shared some stories with me about how she's just lifted others up through her leadership experience, helped other people along in her career, just how others have helped her along in her career. And I thought, if we're starting this webcast and we want to share what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging can possibly mean in the industry, how people walk around us every single day and embody diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it doesn't have to be the big bad voodoo term that we sometimes see it out to be. That we're speaking with real people, and we want to do that for everyone. We want to grow this community. So without further ado, my friend and amazing management consultant, Emily Carlon. Emily, can you please introduce yourself to the ability that you can? We want to make sure
Yeah,
that you could do that. Thank you.
absolutely. First of all, though, I just want to say how excited I am and how excited I am that you started this podcast because I truly believe that the world needs more Perry family and Ivan Perry. I think you just are such a fantastic example of what the world can look like if people lead with kindness. And to your point, treat people like people. So I'm just thrilled to be here. I think you hit the high points on your introduction of me, but I would flip the importance to say, more importantly, I'm your friend, and secondarily, I've been traveling on this crazy management consulting path for almost 2 decades now, and had a lot of mixed experiences along the way. And I really love to focus all of my energies on the people.
Hmm.
Um, I have a very different background than most people who are in this industry. I majored in early childhood education. I thought I was going to be a kindergarten teacher, taken a bunch of twists and turns, and ended up where I am today. And I think having that different background, different education, different perspective on life has really helped me in my career. And so what I love about what you're trying to do is kind of show, we don't all have to be cut from the same mold. We don't all need to come from the same background. We all bring a perspective that matters and is helpful. So I'm excited.
Well, I love that. And just for the audience out there, I do have a neurodiversity, so you'll see me look down every now and then to take notes because I'll be thinking about a million different things, and it honestly helps me to keep track. Because Emily's saying amazing things, and the webcast versus podcast helps everyone else in the audience to either see, relate, and just have those different modalities in the way that we can capture these webcasts moving forward. So thank you so much, Emily, for sharing that. And you hit an interesting point there when you said you coming from early childhood development and thinking that you're going to go a very different career path. And then to find out that not only are you in management consulting, but can you let people know what industry you focus on? Because I've always found that very interesting, that the type of industries that you focus on within management consulting, because that's very different from your early career too, right? Can you explain that one?
Yeah. Yeah, so primarily focused on government clients right now. I have worked across industry, commercial, state and local. Right now, I'm more federally focused, and primarily in IT, which
Hmm.
is also funny because I could not code anything if you paid me $1 billion. Um, but I'm primarily focused on, organizational change management within CIO offices and other parts of agencies and organizations that are trying to make significant changes and modernize and move along with the technologies as they're changing and growing every year.
Now, for the audience that's not too familiar, and myself included, I haven't worked directly in these specific industries. Overall, can you kind of describe for our audience what's the general demographic of the industry? Are we talking gender-wise, ethnicity-wise? Um, kind of, it's global. I'd love to understand if you're working primarily domestically, globally, and what type of diversity do you see, just so people can understand more about um, your audience, your clientele.
Yeah, so primarily domestic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there is a great deal of diversity. I think there's diversity the way that we typically think about it. And then I think, as I've proven kind of with my background, there's diversity in knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding and where people, working in technology in general, it's just everywhere right now. You
Mm-hmm.
can't really do anything. I mean, look at how we're talking today.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes on different flavors and the the different ways that people are using it and how it fits within their organization is so drastically different. So I would say I see diversity across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Um, very diverse clientele in terms of background, in terms of knowledge, in terms of vision, so it makes it fun. I always say it's kind of like being a detective. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to get in there and understand the clients and figure out where they're trying to head and what's keeping them from getting there and
Mm-hmm.
start from there.
That's very interesting. So, one of the interesting things also about diversity, equity, and then the inclusion and belonging piece. So, sometimes we find that while some industries or companies or organizations can be very diverse, sometimes we see that just because it's diverse, we do tend to look at, well, what does inclusion mean and what does belonging mean? Um, Organizations have a lot of different ethnicity, whether it's age, gender, neurodiversity, but to the extent that those groups feel like they belong, are there employee resource groups? Do they feel like they're all connected to the mission? Sure, I have a ticket to the dance. I feel like I'm in the company, I'm paid by the company, but do I feel like I belong in this company? Can you kind of explain more of your journey into the industry and how you've been, I guess, not only accepted into the organization, but how you've become someone who feels included and how you felt like you belong now?
Yeah. I think you kind of hit my perspective on the head when you were talking about it's not really this big hairy beast that we all think about, right? I think we think
Mhm,
about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as being something that's so big and so metrics driven, and you need all of that, right? And you need those
mhm,
programs, you need those supports, things like that. But what I found to be the most impactful in my career and where I hope I've had the most impact is really at the individual level.
mhm,
You need the organization backing you up and you need the culture that supports that inclusivity and belonging. But more importantly, I think it's nurturing and looking for talent that thinks of people as people, right? I
mhm,
mean, somebody said something to me in a training the other day, and it was a sales training, right? And it was a wonderful training. But what they said was people don't buy a solution, they buy a relationship.
mhm,
And I think that's really true with work too, right? We work for companies, but really we work for people and relationships. And I look at, when I first started out with a degree in early childhood education, kind of just moving along my career path, the biggest question I would get in interviews was like, well, you have this education background. What makes you qualified for X?
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
And I always thought that was such an interesting question because what makes anyone qualified for X?
Exactly,
And
exactly.
if a teacher can manage a classroom, and the way I would always answer it is, if I could manage a classroom of 35 8-year-olds with all different abilities, all different backgrounds, all different passions, I can do anything. And I
Mhm,
really, and I think, and I always promote, hire teachers, hire
mhm,
teachers. They think about things differently. They think about people first. They
mhm,
think about the psychology of every situation. They think about how to individualize messages and communications, right? But if there hadn't been people willing to take a chance on me and accept that answer, I wouldn't be where I am today, because you have to be willing to look at the person as an individual and really care about and hear their story. I think that's what really promotes that sense of belonging, right? Is
mhm.
like,
I love
I
that.
always talk about it like, diversity, equity, inclusion. We have tons of meetings about it. And we're always thinking about it. We're always talking about it. One element that I think oftentimes gets overlooked is how are the people on the receiving ends of those efforts feeling, right?
Yes. Yes.
Are those efforts and all the time and energy that we're putting into developing metrics and groups, and are they effective? And
Mm-hmm.
are they really, at the end of the day, leading to that feeling of belonging, which is the real story, right? I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
doing all of the other things to try to make people feel like no matter who they are, they can be their authentic selves and they'll belong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that really happens at the individual level with the
Mm-hmm.
support of the broader organization.
No, I love that piece in particular. Now, have you ever had to, when you think about someone saying, okay, looking at your background, what makes you feel like you're qualified to be here? Have you ever had to just agree to disagree, or you ever run into someone where it's just like, I can't change your mind? Like, what is going
Yeah.
on here? How do you
No,
deal
so
with that?
I kind of joke because I think that consulting in general, people who gravitate toward consulting, a lot of us are what I call it. I'm sure I didn't coin the term, but I've been using it for so long, anxious overachievers, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No matter what we majored in, no matter what we did before this job, I think people gravitate to consulting with this sense of I want to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do the best. I want to win. I want to be viewed as X, right? And might be subconscious, but we're very driven by that. Um, I think that anxiety part
Mm-hmm.
can be something that bonds us all, bonds people together, but also, to your point, I think some people recognize, they'll ask that question and they'll listen to my answer and they'll maybe sense that anxiety of like, think I'm good enough, see me for who I am, look,
Mm-hmm.
not what I look like on paper, all of those things that we all feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the worst leaders I've had and the leaders I've struggled with the most have been the leaders that see that anxiety and they almost exploit it for their own benefit. Like, oh, she wants to prove herself.
Uh-huh.
So I'm gonna make sure that she always feels like she's trying to prove herself, right? And
Mm-hmm.
has to
Mm-hmm.
has to earn her place in this world, has to earn her place in this whatever. Um, and that's really hard because you can't operate under anxiety all the time.
Oh yeah.
The
Mm-hmm.
best leaders I've had have been the leaders who sense that in me and see that I want to excel, I want to succeed, I want to be better. And they try to kind of calm that anxiety and bolster me up and
Mm-hmm.
say, I see Emily for Emily. I think Emily can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't worry about the rest. And I think that happens in the corporate world. Like it's really interesting. I feel like we show up authentically in friendships. We show up authentically as parents.
Mm-hmm.
We show up authentically as all over the place. And then we get to work. And it's like we have to put ourselves into this mold of
Oh
who
yeah.
we think work wants us to be.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, the places I've stayed the longest, the places I've enjoyed working have been the places that say, just show up as Emily,
Mm-hmm.
right? Be Emily and let's see what happens. And it works. Every time I've tried to be someone else, I've failed.
Mm-hmm. I I love that. And for our viewing audience, let's say people of different generations, right? Let's say there's someone fresh into the workforce, new into consulting, knowing that there are going to be times where they're dealing with anxiety, or even from a neurodiversity standpoint, anxiety, but let's say it could be coupled with depression or any type of um, some people don't like to use the word disability. Some people like to use just neurodiversity to the extent where let's just add some more in there where some people have taken on this thought that it can impact someone's mental well-being or mental health, right? Um, Anxiety, depression, bipolar, just different pieces that can fit into what we'd call a neurodiversity, right? How would you help someone create any type of steps or actions that can help them be successful in a
Yeah.
career in consulting, knowing that some of these things may happen, may come up? Like, are there any steps that you'd say, here's what you can do, here's what's helped me, you may want to
Yeah.
consider?
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
consulting as a generality, but I would say for me, making that move from being right out of college and climbing up the ladder to now having big teams that work for me and mentors that I very much look up to. I think what I would go back and tell my younger self is be honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's just a person. Your boss is a person, your client is a person, your coworker is a person, right? And that allowing for a little bit of that vulnerability, setting some boundaries, fair boundaries. You have to be professional. You have to understand you're there to do a job. But one thing that's really important to me is most days I really try to put my daughter on the bus
Mm-hmm.
and get her off the bus, right? It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always work, but COVID has really allowed us to kind of shift our mentality, right? And so I'll say to people sometimes, if a meeting isn't super important and I know I can jump back on in 15 minutes after we get back from the bus stop, we're at the same bus stop. So Ivan and I hang out, have a lot of
Yes,
these
we do.
conversations there.
Yes, we do.
Um, but I say that and I say, this is important to me. Being a professional is important to me, right? My job is important to me. Being a mom's really important to me. This is how I define being a mom for my kids, and this is how I want to show up. And does that work? Because you don't, in my opinion, and again, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't really want to stay somewhere where I couldn't authentically be myself
Mm-hmm.
and succeed at authentically being myself. You don't want to pretend that you're someone you're not, because eventually it's just so exhausting and you can't keep it up anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you either find the place and the people who are going to pull you up and recognize who you are, what's important to you as a whole person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, or maybe you go look to be somewhere else.
Absolutely. Now, so that kind of makes me think, with like 2 decades in the workforce, given your experience being a people leader, having been starting your career as an individual contributor, when you think about some organizations that are more progressive, they understand that accommodations must be made for people. And we're talking like actual accommodations, people
Yeah.
with different types of physical disabilities, neurodiversities, actual accommodations in the building, accessibility in the workforce, et cetera. So just from your personal opinion, we're talking macro, so we're talking bigger uh, perspective here, not just personal experience. What do you think about accommodations in general in the workforce? Do you think this is something that actually should be handled like by companies overall, or do you think this is something actually that could be tackled at the manager or the personal level? Because you've led people in teams. Do you think this is something that should be an action taken by both, one or the other, or do you think it really
Yeah.
should just be focused on one?
Yeah, I mean, that's way out of my area of expertise. So I'll
Mm-hmm,
just speak
mm-hmm.
as a human.
Personal, yep,
As a
exactly.
human, I probably think both, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm,
there are some companies should be building a culture that is inclusive, that does
mm-hmm,
make people belong, and that does meet the needs of the individual, right? But we
mm-hmm,
all know big companies, those things are hard. So I think it's also really important on the individual side to find advocates,
mm-hmm,
to advocate for yourself, to find advocates within the organization, who will truly understand and go to bat for you.
mm-hmm,
I think managers can sometimes, depending on the organization, right, they may be able to exercise a lot of flexibility, right? So stopping that conversation at the manager level, if you have a manager who says, that works, that's fine,
mm-hmm,
whatever you
mm-hmm,
need, go do it, making sure that you're protected by the organization, but you and your manager have a good rapport. And then I also think obviously that the organizations need to support that. And I think a lot of it too is like training, right? I think
mm-hmm.
figuring out who you are as an organization and then training your management to walk the walk and act that way.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of biased here to my audience because I know your relationship with your husband, Steve, and my relationship with,
Ew. No, I'm just kidding.
I know, who's that person? With my wife, Susie. Again, who's that person? We don't know who these people are. But it's a relationship of mutual respect, and it's not a relationship where it's, oh, the husband is babysitting the kids tonight. It's like, no, husbands are parents too, right? Like
Yeah.
we trade up, we help each other, we compensate with each other, and we're both there for our kids. How would you coach, mentor a first time parent? who is career driven, but doesn't want to feel any associated guilt with being career driven and also wants to feel the parenting side. And how would you help them? What advice would you give them? Because I think this is an important aspect that I think personally I've observed you do quite well, and I'd love for you to give some advice to some of our listeners on how they can negotiate that.
Well, thanks for saying that because I don't always feel like I'm doing it well.
Steve paid me. I'm not gonna lie, but no, I was joking.
But no, that's all really good. So it's actually funny. A friend of mine recently just had her first child, and she was
Mhm,
asking me a lot of these same questions. And I think the first step is to figure out what it means to you to be a parent,
mhm,
because you can talk to moms and dads. We all define it differently, and each way is okay. It's what works for you, right? One person may say, okay, well, it's important to me that I get to X performance for my child, but I'm okay missing these other things. And you may talk to other parents who don't want to miss anything. And
mhm,
there's people in between, and there's people who, so a lot of it is so driven from who you are on the inside. I mean, even between Steve and I, we define it differently. I'm sure you and Susie define it differently. What
mhm,
are the places that you feel you need to lean into, and how, and define that? And
mhm,
no one's going to be able to really define that for you. So I think the first step is figuring out, and it changes over time, right? Like what
mhm,
they need at 6 months is different than what they need at 3 years, is different than 16, is different than, it just keeps
mhm,
evolving. So I think defining who you are in that moment and then allowing yourself to evolve. Coming
mhm,
off of maternity leave with my daughter, I wasn't really feeling that ready to go back to work, right? And that's evolved. Now I love going into work. And after my son, I felt much more ready to go back. So I think it's, again, and I probably sound like a broken record. I think for me, everything is so individual, right? Trying to put a blanket solution onto people just doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're a consultant, you're trying to sell a solution to something. It doesn't work when you're a parent. It doesn't work when you're an employer. And it's hard when you have so many individuals, but it's really up to what is that defined as a parent, right?
mhm,
For you. And then you have to put the boundaries in place to support that, and make sure that you're clear about your boundaries, and that you've talked about them, and there's mutual understanding with those boundaries, and there's going to be give and take. I think communication, right? If you want to
mhm,
go to soccer practice every Wednesday at 5, put an out of office on your calendar Wednesday from 4:30 to 6:30, right? I mean, it's non-negotiable. You decided that was important for you. So I think it's defining who you want to be and what's important to you and your priorities, communicating them clearly and making sure there's mutual understanding, and setting boundaries so that you maintain that time.
mhm. Wow, I love that. And that brings us to our 30-minute conversation. I can't believe the time has already flown by. But what I want to say to our community, to our audience, this is one of those conversations. It's the start of many. We're going to continue to build this out. Thank you so much to Emily for being the first. And it's no coincidence that, we're going to be dropping the first webcast with Emily in Women's History Month because um, I've just heard her stories over time. They've had such an impact on the way that I view just interacting with my daughter. Our friendship has meant a lot, but it's also seeing her in her element, and just the discussions that you have about your experiences, and I've loved every second of it. And I think that the audience and the community, they can learn so much. And I think not only did you give your personal experiences, but steps, actions like that people can use and apply. And I think that's so important. So I can't say thank you enough, Emily. And it's been such a pleasure. I think that as this evolves, there may be another point in time we bring you back on with like other guests as well. But this 30-minute bite was enough so you could step away from work and then step back into it, right? Because
Yes, and
we could
I
go
loved
longer.
this. I forgot we were recording, honestly. So I'll come back anytime. This was great. It was like being at the bus stop.
Excellent. So, I will make sure everyone in our community that this is posted on our YouTube page, and we'll be able to post it on LinkedIn as well. We'll try to make them in small snippets in case other people can only look at small pieces at a time before they get distracted. But we will make sure that this is accessible to everyone. Thank you again to Emily, and I hope you all have a great day. Lots of love.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.